Hi, I'm Daniel Lefebvre and welcome to Ruby on Rails. In this video, we're going to do a brief overview of Ruby and Rails and some of the concepts that tie them together. We'll start by looking at Ruby. Ruby is a general-purpose programming language created in the early 1990s. Ruby is a true object-oriented programming language, which means that all of the types in Ruby are themselves objects. Ruby was designed to be intuitive, fun, while promoting increased productivity. Rails, on the other hand, is an application development framework for Ruby. Rails is a full stack framework designed for creating data-rich dynamic web pages. Rails uses common software patterns which enforce a highly structured way of programming. Rails facilitates rapid prototyping and testing. So the four main patterns used by Rails are active record pattern. An active record pattern is a way of accessing the data in the database that gives you a more intuitive database interface, a way to access it easily through your code without having to jump through a lot of hoops and write a lot of SQL queries. In fact, you shouldn't have to write any SQL queries when you're using the database in Rails. Rails relies on convention over configuration, which is to say that Rails requires you to do things the same way, name things the same way, put things in the same folder, and then Rails will look for them in those particular folders rather than having separate files where you would go in and tell it where to look for everything. Every Rails application will have everything in the same places. Rails uses the pattern don't repeat yourself, or dry. Don't repeat yourself is basically the idea of don't write your code more than once if you can get away with it. Write it in a reusable format and use it again. Put it in a place where it can be accessed repeatedly if it needs to be accessed repeatedly. And don't just rewrite it for every new application that you need to create. And finally, it uses the model view controller, which may be one of Rails' biggest contribution to how web development's done. The model view controller separates the model from the view and uses a controller to coordinate the two. And it creates a real separation of the logic behind your code from the presentation of your code. Ruby on Rails also relies on a program called Gems. And Gems is a package manager that's basically used to install Rails. It's typically used to install Rails. It's also used to install other gems and other pieces of pre-written Rails code and Ruby code that you can add to your websites to allow you to create things more rapidly and to have libraries that have been written and tested for you that you don't have to go back and rewrite and reinvent the wheel every time. Along with Rails, there are other gems that can be quite helpful for your development and cover everything from security, testing, e-commerce, game creation, music, and graphics. A lot of the work that you're going to do for Ruby and Rails is done through terminal, or if you're using Windows, it's done through the command line. You can get a lot of work done in just a few lines in terminal if you know the right commands to run. You can edit Ruby by using any text editor. In Linux and Windows, I like Genie and Bluefish. On the Mac, I'm using CodeRunner. If you're looking for something that's more cross-platform, a lot of people use NetBeans and Eclipse. That's our brief overview. I hope you learned something and enjoyed, and we look forward to seeing you again.